There's a new fire chief in town, and he thinks he has a few ideas that will be good for the department and the city.
KLTV7's Jamie Boyum spoke with Chief Greg Grimes about his plans for the future of the Longview Fire Department.
Chief Greg Grimes retired after 32 years at the Allen Fire Department, where he became Assistant Operations Chief. In June, he was hired to the Longview Fire Department. He'd like to initiate a few new policies, like charging for a lift assist call, which is picking up someone who has fallen and can't get up.
$250 after the first lift at these skilled nursing facilities, and hopefully that will reduce those incidences and create some self-reliance on these agencies or these skilled nursing facilities to do this stuff on their own, and that way our crews are more readily available for emergencies.
He said they had 381 lift assists, which would have been billable in 2024. But with assists, there would be exceptions.
Crews get there and they realize that the individual is injured, then we'll certainly waive the fee and provide the medical care and transport as we would with anybody else.
He says the charge would not apply to private residences. He's also looking into a lease purchase program to help make the cost of replacement more manageable.
And so what that advantage is it provides a specific number per year that we can budget for the next 7 years for new apparatus, and then we'll rotate those as needed to keep the fleet in really good shape.
He says responding to non-emergency calls adds wear and tear to mobile fire apparatus, and if there's another call in the same district,
then we have to respond from other stations, which extends the response time,
which can add even more wear and tear. He says apparatus builds take 40 to 46 months, and some engines will need to be replaced in the next few years. There are 2 new engines coming in the next year. Jamie Boyum, KLTV 7 News.
The chief says buying 4 replacement engines and a ladder truck outright would cost $7 to $8 million. But a lease purchase would stretch the payments out over 7 years, and that would lessen the budget strain. Any changes would have to be approved by Longview City Council.